welcome to the third episode of Chainge Talks, where we'll be discussing the topic of design for manufacturability within the fashion industry. My name is André Llamas, and I'll be your host for today. So with a background in engineering and having worked several years for the automotive industry, I'm currently the head of project management at Platform, a company whose mission is focused on drastically reducing the overproduction and waste in the fashion industry. So for today's episode, as you might have noticed, we're honored to have two very special guests with us, John Thorbeck and Brad Ballantyne. So John is already a regular within the Chainge Talks and should not require any sort of introduction, as he is a distinguished leader in the fashion industry with a career spanning several decades and numerous high-profile companies. John's insights into the world of fashion are invaluable, and his passion for innovation and sustainability has driven him to found Chainge Capital, a firm dedicated to transforming the industry. Also, and as an advisor to the International Trade Center and the International Apparel Federation, John has helped shape policy and promote sustainable practices in the fashion industry. Brad Ballantyne is also a dynamic leader with an extensive experience. He has a proven record of driving businesses turnarounds and strengthening sales and operations by implementing best practices. Brad has a deep understanding of business process from raw fiber to retail, and he's currently the CEO of MAS Acme, a company part of MAS Holdings, a massive manufacturing powerhouse employing over 118,000 people in 17 countries, and the #1 South Asia apparel manufacturer. So Brad, John, thank you so much for joining us today once again.
Thanks for having us.
And as per usual, so I'll provide a short introduction to the topic, after which I would kindly ask for our guests to share their thoughts, and eventually opening up the floor for discussion, and all attendees would be then invited to participate. So as most of you are probably aware of, the current paradigm within the fashion industry includes working in a model which favors volume, lowest prices, and demand creation rather than supply flexibility. Merchants usually work with predicted demand, where production is based on forecast, which for a number of reasons may turn unmet. The excess inventory, if you will, can be considered a lack of prediction, the uncertainty of demand in a way. So while favoring volume over flexibility, the supply chain struggles to actually meet trends and can most times arrive too late in the market, ending up with excess inventory. And then also showing you here the statistic that has already been presented in past Chainge Talk episodes, and which I have found so overwhelming. I mean, where effectively, in order to sell 3 shirts at regular price, you actually have to produce 10, since, as I said, 3 are sold at regular price, 2 will be sold at discount, and 5 do not sell at all, and are then subject to waste and destruction, either in a landfill or via incineration. So when one thinks about this, a very considerable portion of the total fashion industry production is waste or overproduction, either in unsold or sold in markdowns. And the consequence of this is too much stock, too much pollution. Indeed, the high costs of the low-cost sourcing model. And here the industry faces really a capital crisis and a talent gap. So as Lauren Sherman put it in her article for Business of Fashion, the cost of inventory that doesn't sell is fashion's biggest inefficiency. As a matter of fact, and according to Boston Consulting Group, each year, fashion retailers around the world invest more than $1 trillion in their in-season and end-of-season markdown programs. And here as well, basically the perception of merchants and retailers. So they actually recognize that the pain points are normally around inventory, markdown, and flexibility. So brands and retailers generally want to reduce inventory and markdown. They want to refresh the floor more often. They want to have more flexibility to react to demand changes. And also they would like to know their suppliers' full capabilities. Unlike what one might think, markups on production, ranging from 3 to 10 times the cost of production, are significantly different from the actual margin. In fact, the average gross margin in the fashion industry in 2021 was of 42%, while the net margin was 4.7%. And this was actually on a very good year. Normally, the average net income in the industry is around 3%. The traditional end-to-end process in fashion may last something between 12 to 18 months, where clearly the upstream activities from planning to product development to raw material sourcing are the ones taking up the most time and introducing restrictions further down the road. But what if one could consider introducing digital designs within constraints? That is the manufacturer's constraints, and that combined with a digital raw material library validated for manufacturability. This could, in theory, effectively create a sandbox environment for the designer to fully create with the assurance of its manufacturability, and having validated design and cost with upstream and downstream partners prior to physical sampling. Now showing you a study from Duke depicting the value-added stages in apparel. And what strikes here the most about this graph is that the most value-adding stages are intangible services that occur before and after the apparel production process. So unlike what one might think, the same increment for improvement effectively renders significantly more added value when applied further away. That means upstream and downstream from production. So when it comes to the upstream section, R&D, design, and purchasing, I would point out that within the design and buying process, there is currently virtually no design constraints. There is generally a lack of education of both designers and buyers in terms of selecting standard raw materials and patterns. There is usually a lack of connection to suppliers to actually know the supplier's capabilities. There's generally also a high turnover of personnel. And while the feedback loop of a given product development is between 18 to 24 months, the average tenure of designers and buyers in some cases is actually lower than this, meaning that they don't go past one feedback loop. And overall, there's lack of accountability among buyers and designers in terms of and with regards to financial metrics. So in sum, the current paradigm of fashion production is heavily flawed, and it's characterized by a significant disconnection between the design and buying process with the production process, particularly in its disconsideration for design for manufacturability. This disconnection leads to high inventories and an inability to quickly respond to changing market trends, resulting in significant losses of margin due to inevitable markdowns and liquidations. Additionally, this disconnection also results in the high consumption of resources, including time, money, and material samples, which then exacerbates the problem and creates a vicious cycle of waste and inefficiency. So how about involving manufacturers in the fashion design process? Would it have a positive impact on the fashion industry? Which brings us then to our debate today. And Brad, starting with you, what is the current paradigm for design and production within the fashion industry? And how would implementing design for manufacturability practices change the industry's current approach and assist us in capturing all of this lost value?
Thanks, Andre. I think, we could characterize this initially with a start on what is the job of a merchant or a designer versus the job of manufacturing. I've actually been told once in my career, the job of a merchant is to go figure out what the market needs and then let everyone else know what it takes to what they need in order to get it done. And a merchant, quote, shouldn't care how difficult it is to manufacture the item. And I find that to be completely incorrect. So I think the standard operation of the industry is to just have a disconnected relationship and just tell the factory what's needed and expect them to jump through hoops to get it done. And in many cases right now, the factories are actually jumping through hoops and getting it done, but it takes a lot longer to get that done versus having a full knowledge of the manufacturability of the item and placing that in somewhere where it can be produced quickly. The other piece is it's very difficult for manufacturers to position fabrics ahead of time because they have no visibility of what that fabric selection might be. A common set of raw materials would be the best way around that to understand, okay, we're going to position, the 20% of our materials, the 10 to 20% of our materials that make up 80% of the volume. Those will be ready somewhat on demand. You could dye them in a day or two, and then you can get into production. The lead time is the problem, and the solution to lead time is designed for manufacturability and hedging of raw materials ahead of time, a safe hedge of raw materials ahead of time. So I think the industry just has to change the buyer-supplier relationship and understand what it takes to get something done.
Okay, and actually, I mean, we were discussing this probably before you arrived, Brad, me and John, and that the question is really, so this has been implemented across other industries over the past few decades. So this is nothing new in the automotives or the electronics industry. Why do you figure? Why is it that, in your opinion, it took so long to reach this stage and to reach this point in specifically in the fashion industry?
Yeah, I think the fashion industry typically is sometimes accused of chasing the needle, so to speak. They call it chasing the needle or chasing the lowest price. And the more we chase lowest price, the less relationship we have with the manufacturers. And so I think that's created some issues in the automotive industry. And Gonzalo has mentioned this before. There's such a tight relationship that in many cases, the suppliers are located geographically in accordance to where the automobile manufacturers are. And they agree up front, hey, for the next 5 years, we're going to use these set of parts so you can safely hedge those and make them available as we need them. And they commit a shared risk model where they commit to saying, we'll use just these parts for the next 5 years, and then we'll make a plan to shift to new parts as we launch new models. And for some reason, the fashion industry feels the need to reinvent every 6 months, every season, or every 6 months, or every year. We're reinventing a whole new collection because that's what the consumer wants, instead of thinking about common platforms. There are some business today that are acting like the automotive industry, and I think they're seeing lots of great results and moving out of their competitors.
Okay. John, any thoughts on this?
Well, Brad pushed some hot buttons there. And it's a big question. The lessons have been in electronics and autos for a long time, in maybe a modest defense of the fashion industry. I will certainly acknowledge the SKU complexity that's in fashion that is not in other industries. So it's difficult to make that bridge, but it is a fundamental question of why those lessons don't transfer well into fashion. And Brad mentioned a key phrase, which was shared risk, and I actually put that in capital letters. And I think we have an industry that's looking for an alternative to a cost-driven, transactional, seasonal, adversarial bargaining culture. And what is the alternative to that? So when we say shared risk, it's not meant to be a soundbite or a PR phrase. It really means quantifying the value of risk. And if you begin to look at it in that perspective, then that pushes you further upstream into a collaboration with retailers. A very good example of that is how we can break down the finished goods relationship into its components. Brad mentioned hedging raw materials. I don't mean platforming, I mean hedging, which is having a flow of goods that is available for commitment into finished goods. So hedging your materials and staging your capacities and delaying the decision into finished goods as you await forecasts to improve with time, and then having transportation options, which is either, by sea or by air or by truck. Those elements are elements of risk, not cost. And its impact on FOB pricing and negotiation is multiples of cost of goods sold. So that's a shift in perspective that we can draw from other industries. And I think actually retail has run out of options. Everyone looks for the easy merchandise fix, demand fix, new channel, new pricing, new promotion, new way to drive revenue. And I think we've stalled there. So I think that's brought sort of good pressure to find alternatives. And I think those alternatives really reside upstream in a better supplier relationship. So I'll stop there. This is, certainly a very current topic. So I'm glad we're all here talking about it.
And I mean, I like what Brad said in comparison to other industries, which are perhaps more regional based, or at least they have several factories supplying each region, unlike the fashion industry, which is truly global and truly utilizes the global supply chain. Do you think that the current tendency for nearshoring, for bringing industries back to basically where it used to be previously 30, 40, 50 years ago, to the US, to Europe, should help mitigate in a way this shared risk which I've just spoken of?
In a word,
no.
I certainly don't object to nearshoring, onshoring, friendshoring, but that's a location-driven viewpoint, and I think that actually has minor impact, helpful impact, but minor. The real goal is to reindustrialize, the supply chain, and I'll quote somebody I worked with for a number of years who said, "You really should be able to manufacture and deliver apparel in 10 days or less anywhere in the world." And so it makes you wonder, gee, if the process is so available, maybe it's dramatic to say 10 days, so say 20 if you want. If that is really possible, then why do we have 3-month, 5-month order cycles and 12-month design to market cycles? It's all been driven by an obsession with cost, chasing that cheapest needle, as Brad put it, and there just needs to be an alternative process. So I think exhausting all other possibilities, I think we need to look beyond simply location, and look at how process innovation opens up opportunity between fashion buyers and suppliers.
And I'll add to that, if you do the math on, so if it's concept to store is the way we should measure lead times, not just PO to store. But if you took a process that takes 12 to 18 months and you move it to the United States, close to, assuming the consumption's in the United States, but if you move it close to consumption, you're removing essentially just the lead time of transportation if you use the same current process. And if I use the US as an example, the trade-off of saving 45 days worth of lead time for the cost implications, it's just simply not worth it. And that's why you're not seeing a major shift. There's a lot of conversation about nearshoring or onshoring, but consumption, if you look at apparel and accessories in the United States, only 3% of what's consumed in the United States is made in the United States. And even if companies tried to move in with an existing process, it would be very difficult to hire people to do it. So I think it's just it lacks process change. I think it's surface level thinking. And I think there's so many more things to done. We've modeled out, and I've actually been a part of a group that went from concept to store in 4 weeks in the US. And that same model works for offshore concept to store in 90 days. So 90 days is from anywhere in the world is possible at, maybe just a little bit more than the current price structure. That's where the value is, process change and different philosophies and how we do business. Not just location.
I might add to that. We treat nearshoring or onshoring as somehow equivalent, as if we're just simply moving production, and it actually is quite difficult. You may read about the political attractiveness of those kinds of strategies, or creating jobs, or reversing out, the trend to offshore. That's fine, but you don't read about the initiatives that don't work. And there's been a couple of high profile, high investment, several $100 million investments by both Nike and Adidas that failed to transfer meaningful production into Mexico and into the US. Of course, these are not going to get a press release, but Nike in particular, in partnership with a company called Flex, which is one of the largest electronics manufacturers for Apple and others. The two of them invested in 1 million square feet in Guadalajara over several years, and were unable to make it a productive investment for both sides. And it became a massive write-down for each company. So you have to say, here's two very capable companies with the resources to be, creative and long-term, and yet both failed at a nearshoring initiative. You really have to pause and say, oh, okay, why did that happen? If big smart companies have difficulty, we need to be careful that nearshoring and onshoring is not treated as if it's an answer. It may be one more question, but it's not an easy answer at all. Okay.
So coming back to design for manufacturability, and these were very good inputs with regards to potential nearshoring. What steps do you see that are currently being taken within the industry to encourage the adoption of design for manufacturability processes and practices?
Well, we talk about learning from other industries. Well, I think Platform E is helping us to learn from within our own industry. And, you haven't mentioned use cases, but Platform E, has demonstrated its on-demand capability, its ability to activate from 3D design into production, and does that in the luxury segment. Mm-hmm. And so it actually is a working model, working, productive, revenue generating, profit model. But maybe I think its potential is much larger scale. And so when you say design for manufacturability, I think it's been treated as kind of a niche approach to limited on-demand options, when in fact I think it has much higher potential. And I'm gonna hold on that, because I think Brad probably has an opinion on that.
I do. I think some of it is that our designer buyer contingent struggles with constraints. There's creative teams don't like constraints. They feel like it keeps them from really doing great work. I think the difference is the execution of said desire. But I also think the industry has gotten used to these long lead times, to the point where if we're struggling to get things done in time, we'll just start earlier. And the earlier you start, the bigger the disconnect between observed demand in season and the ability to supply that demand. So I think the lead time is at the crux of this. The other thing is that I think silos in large organizations especially struggle to bridge the gap and where there's real understanding. But I'll tell you a potential solution that I've seen happen. As process changes kick in, it saves time from those in the design buying applications. For example, I've seen, with Platform E, the ability to reduce manual touches by 90%. We've worked with data scientists that have created buying models that reduced manual touches by 95%. You reduce the time from the designers. It gives them the ability to go and work with manufacturers and go visit the factories and find out what the capabilities are. And of course, if we have something special like Platform E to be able to display those in a visual format, I think it makes it much, much easier to institute the process change. Technology won't fix it, location won't fix it, but the combination of process, technology, and location can be a powerful set of tools.
Of course, so interesting what you said, Brad. I mean, you do see some limitations in implementing such a process. Let's say a full digital catalog of products being for the designer to be able to design as much as possible the potential sandbox environment that I was speaking of. So I'm guessing, I'm not sure if you agree with me, that probably convincing brands and retailers, upper management, would be easier to convince since they are more accountable, since they are more related with all the financial metrics, rather than a designer or a buyer who is more disconnected. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I think it's better to do both. I think it's better to have conversations with the folks that are doing the work and conversations with the leadership to make sure that there's no barrier. I think it's really difficult to come bottoms up, and I think sometimes it's difficult to go top down, because if it's forced on a group and they know that you're part of forcing them to do it, sometimes it creates a rift. I think a lot of it, the fluffy side of this, which I don't like to talk about too much, is I do think there has to be a mindset change. Shelley Shue says it best. It's beauty within constraints. And if you see Shelley's story, you can look at it at SXD, Shelley Shue Design. I can't remember the exact website, but if you Google Shelley Shue Design, you'll see it. She talks about how to create things that are beautiful within a constraint. And I think that needs to be part of our conversation as we move forward. It's fluffy in that it's easy to say, but not easy to do. But I do think it starts with connecting engineers and manufacturing teams with design teams. And right now, the only solution I've ever seen that can do that systematically from a technology perspective, I've seen two, Platform E and Shimaseki. Shimaseki's design platform actually forces you to design for manufacturability. So I think there's only a couple that I've ever seen. I'm sure there are more out there, but those are the two I'm most familiar with.
Exactly, and currently, so we have this problem we have felt in the past, and we have partnered up with MAS and with Brad in particular. We're trying to here create a platform, as we call it, where basically a digital catalog can be displayed with the manufacturer's capabilities with regards to products, and then simply being able also to display all sorts of information with regards to lead times, to inventories, basically making all of this information available to the brand or retailer, so that they can actually decide within a design. They can decide if they would like to get a specific design earlier on, later on, for a specific price. And I'm guessing here that it will always be a trade-off. So you would offer always the possibility of going through the conventional way, which may continue to last as long as it does currently. But then you offer the trade-off. So if you go with the standard raw material pack, if you go with the standard design, in which case you'll get a much more competitive price, and you'll get stuff earlier on.
Yeah, that's well said. And all of this is sort of under a banner headline of supplier-led innovation, and it makes great sense and it's timely. But it's up against retail systems that are built around cost. In terms of enterprise systems that are focused on order management, or payment systems, they tend to be sort of one way. They tend to be highly transactional, and they aren't necessarily built around the proposal or the options that you're describing, Andre. So there's, I think, some learning ahead. I think retail has to embrace a more end-to-end responsibility rather than simply the ex-factory price negotiation. And then again, we get into this, what I would like to think of as a new banner, a new headline, which is really quantifying shared risk and how that opens up sort of the economics that are mutual rather than negotiated out in a win-lose environment every season. So all of these are very promising, but it swims upstream. It fights an existing culture, which generally comes down to price and the retail tendency to treat the cost basis of a supply network as all the same. They're focused on inbound margin. And so there's a change in perspective, there's a change in process, but there's also a change in metrics. And I actually believe this is underway.
I'll add one little piece to that, Andre. Imagine if you took every season, just think about every season, you're designing from scratch your entire assortment. You've got some running styles that may be evergreen. You don't touch those and just let them run. Imagine if you took your development season and say you're going to develop 100 items, take 50 of those, half, and run those through a simplified fit block, existing fabrics, existing constructions, just change that up a little bit to have beauty within constraints, to use Shelley's words. If you did that for just half of your assortment, imagine how much time you'd have left over to spend on the longer lead time, more innovative, more new items. Think about how more effective your design and merchandising teams would be if they had double the time to spend on half of their assortment. Don't you think that would make a great impact?
Absolutely. I mean, you'd have the designers and the buyers focusing on actually their adding value. And as we have discussed previously, Brad, I mean, you see a lot of manual decisions being done right now, a lot of misunderstandings, miscommunications being done via Excel, via simply pointing out in tag packs what the designer actually intends, miscommunications with the factories. I mean, all of this could be easily turned around if the designers will be actually focused on what they're actually good at. I fully agree. And now I mean, opening up the floor for all sorts of intervention from the rest of the participants. And we do have here a question from Ben. Ben, feel free to unmute yourself and introduce your question, if you will.
Sure thing. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I was picking up on the point that you folks raised, which was the question that was asked by Platform Me: how could involving manufacturers in the design process help to improve speed and efficiency of production? Speed and efficiency of production are held back because of a fundamental disconnect between the people who have the actual skills of doing production and pattern making expertise and the people who are conceiving of what they want the end result to be. In between that, you have quite a destructive and disruptive cycle of ongoing iteration and interpretation. Every step of kind of iteration that you remove from the process is a net benefit to sustainability. It's a net benefit to design acuity and accuracy. It's a net benefit to cost efficiency and a bunch of other things. The issue that we've found when we've had conversations with brands is people are very wedded to the current way of working because those cycles of iteration and interpretation, technically speaking, the industry can afford them because it runs on economies of scale and it runs on volume and variety and chasing that lowest needle, like you said. That to me is the main mindset shift that I think needs to happen, is making people aware of the fact that the industry can only afford to keep making multiple samples and keep trying to get things right and keep sending it backwards and forwards in a very specific set of circumstances. And I get that people want to perpetuate those circumstances and they're very protective of keeping it like that. The wider world is probably going to change those circumstances in the very near future to the stage where all of a sudden, from a sustainability perspective, you can't afford to have that much interpretation and iteration. From a cost perspective, you can't because of margin erosion. From a pure like volume production, you can't. So from my point of view, there is that mandate for change. There is that mandate to do things differently. And I understand why the industry hasn't warmed to it straight away, why there's some hesitance to say, well, why is this not, like you said in your opener, why is this not spoken about more often? Why is this not acted on more often? It's because it is that self-perpetuating cycle. But to me, the big drivers are going to come from outside. The big drivers are going to come from the fact that you won't be able to operate that way anymore. It's just not a sustainable way of doing it. And I don't just mean environmentally or humanitarian wise. I mean, it's not sustainable by literal definition. You can't keep doing it without it steadily detracting from itself. That was what I was driving at with that point anyway.
Thank you so much.
Well said. That's well said, Ben.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, back to the numbers that Andre pointed out, gross margin going from 42 on average down to 3 or 4. That's the gross margin. That's the netted margin. When you look at the initial margin, it's 70% that evaporates into this 3 or 4% netted if you're lucky. And so when Ben says this is not sustainable, there you go. It's a system that destroys this enormous variance of margin from initial markup down to net profit. That's just wild inefficiency.
I've had financial analysts from outside the industry look in and ask the question, why would you do all that work for 3% profit?
Yeah.
All the working capital and all the work and effort just for 3%. And they're like, I'm out. No thanks.
Different industries, I guess. I see we have a question from Deborah. Deborah, again, feel free to raise your voice and ask it in front of our guests.
Sorry, I was struggling with my mute button. So I understand the conversation is a lot about what motivates people to go offshore, onshore, cost and time. But having been in this industry for now 35 years or so, I think the separation of the make from the ideation, from the design, has created merchandisers, designers, product developers who know less and less about what goes into product, whether it's raw material, technical performance, or finished product performance. And so the idea of integrating manufacturers more in the design process, it has its own supply chain challenge, but actually challenges the very structure of a vertical retail or a brand. Because it in essence says that if there's a seminal ideation, seminal design, the execution and the perfection, whether it's cost or engineering, it exists somewhere else, and that's with the manufacturer. And I work with groups of people, brand over brand, who are threatened by how much a manufacturer has come to know about their brand, their product, and can make solid recommendations, better recommendations on building product. And so it's a lot of people's jobs that are at stake. And I don't mean that from the economic standpoint. It's a lot of people's egos that get challenged. And I think that's the nature of that creates an us-them. The vendor doesn't know. The vendor is just a maker. And I know better because I'm a designer or a product developer, and I know my brand better. And that divide is often, for me, on the supply chain and operations side, the hardest bridge to cross.
Yeah, thank you for that, Deborah. Any care to comment? John, Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Well,
would love to. Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
go
Sean.
ahead, Brad. Yeah.
Okay, I would love to speak to that because I've learned this the hard way. But I was an industrial engineer for years, and you go in and you introduce a process change, and the first thought, if you don't correct them, the first thought is, oh my gosh, this is going to eliminate my job. So then the cohort that you need to implement the change lock up because of fear, and sometimes I think you're right, Deborah, ego. As I got smarter, as I'm trying to do it over and over again, I started sitting down with the people and said, all right, we're gonna with the ones doing the work, the experts, in that job function, and sit down and say, we're gonna introduce a couple new ways to do some things. But before we do that, I want to ask you, if you had 30% of your day left, if we reduce the amount of time it's spent for you to do 30% of your daily tasks, what's your wish list? What would you like to do that you don't have time to do today? Make that list, and then as we make the change, then you get to start adding things from your list to your daily pieces. And I've got my favorites are, I'd like to study the market more. I'd like to visit the factories. I'd like to do all these things that we never have time for, and it's frustrating to me. I was like, great, we're going to make some changes so I'll have time for you to go do that. And then the second thing that you get from that is you get the ability to scale without having to train new people to do things. And so it kind of builds on top of each other. That helps the mindset change, but obviously we can't get that done. But I'm amazed, as you are, Deborah, the amount of people you find in that fetal position. They're so afraid to change, even though it's good for them. It's amazing.
Yep, John.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think Deborah's brought up a big word, ego and pride. Where does value get created? And unfortunately, I think too many U.S. retailers think that the higher virtues are in design and marketing and merchandising. Well, there's an inversion of that formula where a lot of value now is being created by manufacturers. There was once an attitude toward China that they weren't able to access our market, or in Europe they aren't skilled at marketing and merchandising and branding. Well, we've seen there's an awful lot of value being created on a manufacturing base, whether it's Shein or Temu or Alibaba, or it's the 40% of direct sellers on Amazon who are coming straight out of factories in Asia, direct into major markets. So this kind of fear factor that Deborah is touching on is actually quite real.
Okay, thank you for that. So we do have time for one final question from the audience, if anyone would like to participate still.
Well, I'll take the moment if you don't mind.
Go ahead, John.
It's a bit of a drum roll, but these subjects are a hot topic, and they were actually exacerbated during the COVID years, when there really was a breakdown between retailers and their suppliers. And that caught the attention of the UN, especially the UN's Agency for Trade in Geneva, which is quite concerned about a model that is as fragile and as adversarial as it proved to be during the COVID years. And the deferred payments, denied payments, delayed payments, all of this is a situation that the industry still is recovering from. Mm-hmm. So the ITC has been a sponsor of an alternative view of the buyer-supplier relationship. We're nearing completion of that, which includes case studies of how value is created that are alternatives to seasonal price transactions. Pleased to say that Platform E has been a participant in those case studies, or at least a couple of them. So it's I guess I'm mentioning this just for anticipation. We look forward to sharing that with industry that really needs to address a broken supply chain and into a more productive relationship, one that doesn't evaporate its own margin season to season and year to year. So stay tuned, and I think this forum actually will be a good place to talk about that study as it's released.
Absolutely looking forward to that. So now is the time, right? I mean, after that supply shock of post-COVID and getting out of lockdowns, people do feel the pain quite recently. Any sort of final comments, Brad?
No, just wanted to say thank you. It's really great to come together and hear some thoughts from extended friends of the industry, and I look forward to future conversations.
All right, then up to me to say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much to both John and Brad and all other participants, also Ben and Deborah for their interesting questions. We look forward to future discussions that will certainly appear throughout these forums, and we look forward also to our next episode, which will be on personalization. So tune in and do let us know if you have any questions in the meantime. Obviously, my contacts will be shared eventually, and I do look forward to getting any questions from you. So thank you so much once again, and have a great weekend ahead.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.